They say death is the ultimate punishment, and that to kill someone is one of the worst crimes ever. However, this is an extremely broad and flimsy statement, which is hardly ever enforced in even the brutal court of public opinion. So, to cut to the point, I'm going to take a look at the most contested forms of murder that get cast out not only in the national courts, but also the social media forums. This is going to get more political than I normally wish to get. But some things in the area of scripture are going to overlap into the arena, despite some individuals, including myself. So, without any further ado, let's just dive straight into it. Assisted dying has been a controversial topic for many years, and has only been made legal in some countries fairly recently. We all fear death, and losing someone that we love is one of the greatest tragedies any family can face. The main issue that crops up, however, is often when medical intervention is only going to prolong a person's suffering, or in some cases, make it worse. Doctors do have an obligation, and in many cases a desire, to improve the lot of people who come into their care. But the sad truth is, some conditions are just uncurable. This doesn't mean that people with these conditions are guaranteed to die. Stephen Hawking, for example, lived for over 50 years with increasingly severe motor neuron disease. And people with Alzheimer's disease can live for many years. But here's the thing you have to ask yourself. If you were faced with a life like that, losing your memory and forgetting your closest friends and family, or being increasingly reliant on a wheelchair for the rest of your life, would you think that life would be worthwhile living? Professor Hawking was a genius, and is a household name, even being on popular sitcom Big Bang Theory. But for all his fame and accomplishments, it's said he resisted the use of his wheelchair, and towards the end of his life was known for being a man in the near sci-fi level piece of life support. I've not been able to find out how he personally felt about his condition, but if I was personally in his position, in his situation, I wouldn't be happy with it at all. My mother in the early stages of Alzheimer's, and my late Nana having had progressive dementia at the time of her passing, I'm aware how such conditions can affect the families of people with those conditions. Assisted dying allows some people the option to end a life of suffering, and in some cases donate their organs to those who need them. In many hospitals, they can choose to refuse treatment or ask to be put on a DNR list, do not be resuscitated. I know a man who has suffered many potentially lethal conditions and has been brought back on numerous occasions, and is still relatively functional, if less able to do the things he used to. Often getting carried away with the projects he can do simply because it's something he can get involved with very effectively. Though he has said he would rather be let to die if one of his conditions puts him pretty much in a state where his wife has to tend to his literal every bodily need. I can completely understand that. And it's that sort of thing that some people end up facing. They are unable to make recoveries like that man was, and can be dependent on life support just to keep them in a stable condition, literally a vegetative state. Not everyone can bring themselves to say goodbye to those who are on the brink of death. So often it ends up burning out not only finances, but also hospitals. Allowing Roman hospital beds is more important for those who have more immediate medical conditions or serious injuries. Plus, some people just can't afford the prolonged medical care required. Being allowed to choose when to die is sometimes a great parting gift. The comedian genius John Cleese once made a bit of a joke about it to his elderly mother. Because once, when he called her up to see how she was doing, she said, "Oh, I'm not feeling very good, I'm feeling a bit down." So he said, "I'll tell you what, Mother, I know someone. If you're feeling very bad again, and I can call him up, he can come over, and he can kill you." Oh, she found that option pleasing to be aware of, or just had a very dark sense of humour. It cheered her up. Whether that helped her remain strong and healthy for the rest of her days, I honestly don't know. But she passed away in the year 2000 at age 101. Knew it being a great thing to choose, having the option to let someone you love die, to remove their suffering, is a worthwhile option to have. Life isn't always worthwhile living if it's in such levels of dependence or pain. Surely it would be a greater sin to prolong such suffering. Hence why the Romans used crucifixion as punishment. God himself used exile and lifelong torture to punish people far more than just killing them would have achieved, and yet took Christ off the cross far sooner than most people would have hung there for. Literally, the Romans had to put a spear in his side to find out whether he was dead or not, and he clearly was. Euthanasia isn't a pleasing thing to look at, but at the end of the day, it's a far better alternative to forcing someone to stay alive through torture, through all manner of discomfort, just so they can be around on Earth. Interesting enough, the spell checker on my word processor gives the alternative word miscarriage or abortion. But in this case, it is the medical procedure of termination that we are referring to. Now, this is an incredibly controversial topic, and Lex from Unlearn the Lies did a very blunt and emotionally charged video on that subject, calling it murder and child sacrifice. Quite apart from the blunt nature of the video, I'm not happy with it, since he also had a very manipulating soundtrack in the background of babies crying. But also he was looking at a single reason for making abortion legal, that being simply because it's a woman's right. Basically saying he gives a woman the right to kill a baby because she doesn't want it, and therefore allows her to be more promiscuous. I can't deny this reason is one that can crop up, and it certainly can be used like that. But it is far away from the only reason. Rape can result in unexpected pregnancies. In some cases, lead a mother to being unable to support their child. Some people also have very abusive relationships, and rightly fear that bring a baby into the world that another partner doesn't want is a greater cruelty than simply terminating them before they enter a very different sort of hell. Since a great many people say that children in foster care or being raised by single mothers are your stereotypical problem children, I'm surprised that those people are actually against abortion, because that's quite often the alternative. If they can't support the child, they can't look after them. In some cases, the parents actually say, "No, you're not having that child. You're not old enough." If for any reason the child came into this world, it's not always because the mother is being promiscuous. As I said, rape, assault, all manner of horrendous things can happen to a child. Unless at the option of abortion, it can be quite devastating to their lives. Also, in some cases, women are unable to give birth safely due to medical conditions or some other factor that can be dangerous or even fatal for her, the baby, or possibly even both. It's certainly something I would never suggest to anyone unless there was no other choice. But having that extra option is certainly preferable, forcing someone to go through it. So far, we have been focusing on the mother, there's no denying that, but the baby can also have conditions that make life, or even the beginning of life, birth, an extremely difficult and risky business. Congenital conditions, severe disabilities, or even lacking of vital body parts. All these can make termination not only a viable option, but can, in some cases, extend termination to near full term, longer than is standard. Whilst I can agree with this in some cases where the condition is only detectable in later stages of pregnancy and can result in a drastic increase in costs preparation for the baby's arrival, which there are many of. No speakers from experience, it's something I've noticed in my brother's life, in my friend's life, and so forth. If the condition is detectable early on, however, I see no need for the extension of the termination window. Being unable to support a child is a terrible thing, especially if they have additional needs. Is it right to bring a child into the world, only to dump them on people who have no idea how to handle them with their own difficulties? especially if they're able to make the decision otherwise, or even if they're unable to deal with things. I don't think it is. So not right for the child. As for the part about being industrial child sacrifice, I don't think it's like that. In fact, some people who have children from unexpected pregnancies in the past have been known to kill their babies at birth. Certainly, it shouldn't be an excuse to be wayward. But it's not a thing that can be written with just cause. It can lead to that. Note, in America, they have guns as a legal right, and they have a higher number of school shootings in their country, or any sort of shooting. Just because it can cause more shooting doesn't mean they are considering removing guns from public circulation. In terms of abortion, this merely requires further education in schools and so reduce the number of unexpected pregnancies. I'm also sure the Bible says putting their children through the fire, which is a reference to the paths walked to the pagan gods of the time. Whilst I don't blame Lex for the passion behind his video, on such a topic, he needs to understand more for making such judgments. In some circumstances, people can use this to have an excuse to be wayward and giving their children in sacrifice. There's no denying that. But more often, it's with the broader circumstances that affect many people, many more people than just a mother that doesn't want the baby. It's not an option I'm inclined to give unless completely necessary. But here's the thing, because it is doable, there are such things as backstreet abortions, and it's far safer to have it done in a safe medical environment by a licensed physician who can do it under healthcare regulation rather than do it in a back street, which can put the mother at risk. It's far more likely to be done by those who probably would make child sacrifices. It's not worth the risk of going that far. It's like I say about illegal migration. Just because it's illegal doesn't reduce migration, it merely increases illegal migration. The death penalty is often thought of as a sign of barbarism and a lack of civilization. But even in the 21st century, many countries still have it. And not just developing countries, but also well-established ones, including China, Japan, Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia, and the United States of America. Whilst quite a few countries have completely abolished the death penalty, some took their time with it, and others still allow that to be an option for serious crimes or even during times of war. Britain, for example, retained it for the crime of regicide and did so until 2004. Although I've noticed a notable number of people are lobbying before its return for the cases of child molestation and rape. This is a difficult thing to impress on people, since despite the attempts to reform prisoners of their crimes, due to the attitudes of the general public, it's all too easy for people to be forced back into their old ways. So for some, death is the only way to prevent reoffending. The issue that crops up in many cases is, what if the person was proven innocent after the execution? Unless a system in place has punitive powers over the descendants of the condemned, proving the innocence of someone who was executed is merely an exercise of principle over law. This is epitomised in the case of Derek Bentley, who was hung for involvement in a burglary that led to one policeman getting killed and the other with a gunshot wound. He was older, taller, and had a set of brass knuckles, whilst his friend and associate in this crime, Christopher Craig, had a gun. He was only around 16, and he was the one who fired the two offending shots. Since the law at the time forbade the hanging of minors, Chris was merely imprisoned. Derek, who was 19, was hung, supposedly for encouraging the shooting of the injured officer. Whilst this was overturned, it was pivotal in the abolition of capital punishment in the UK and its territories. I know there's a film out there starring Christopher Eccleston, who actually played Derek Bentley. I recommend checking it out. I think it was called Let Him Have It, something like that. I mention this to show why it causes problems in the system. Personally, I think if capital punishment was to return, it should be under some very severe caveats. Firstly, it should be for heinous crimes. Maybe regicide, that depends on the monarch, really. Definitely for child molestation and so forth, but under the other caveats as well. The guilty verdict must be reached unanimously before the punishment is even put on the table. Then a fresh trial should be run to gauge whether execution should be the appropriate punishment. It may be a long-winded process, but to avoid any risk of an innocent person being killed for a crime they didn't commit, or sentenced to an overly harsh punishment, it might be well worth it. It also prevents people from trumping up charges to have a rival killed. It's also worth mentioning here soldiers killing people in battle. It happens, and there's no way of hiding from it. I know a couple of squaddies, and whilst we don't talk about it, you can often see in their eyes. There's often the reason behind the killing that justification for their actions could be what they're fighting for. It could be in self-defense, protecting their colleagues, or preventing an act of mass murder by shooting first. It does happen. The same issue comes up with armed police. It can be in any country, even those where the right to bear arms is highly restricted, like the UK. But in the US, where they have a lot of examples of why armed law enforcement should be trained very well and disciplined in a country where the right to bear arms is featured highly in the Constitution. Whilst many incidents hit the news where police shoot an innocent person, it's just as likely to happen with the police being shot at. In the end, when both sides have guns pointing, is often a matter of survival over whom the bullet is aimed at. The Bible has quite a lot to say on the topic of murder. Thou shalt not murder is the sixth of the commonly known Ten Commandments. Since that blanket statement covers all forms of homicide, it's hardly ambiguous. There's only ever one translation that goes against that grain, and that's the Bible in basic English, where it says, "Do not put anyone to death without cause." This sounds alarmingly like the amended commandments from George Orwell's Animal Farm. This only occurs once in the whole usage of the Hebrew word roshak, which commonly means to kill, to murder, and even in modern Hebrew still means homicide, assassination, or murder. So killing is definitely seen as a bad thing in the Bible. In some cases, it advocates the death penalty, killing another, or putting people at risk, and that includes being sexually immoral, which I often point out also means immorality. However, are there exceptions to this rule? There are quite possibly quite a few, and I haven't had much time to go through all of it. But I can name a couple. When I was facing a challenge from a member of the Atheist Republic, he gave a wide number of foolishly quoted scripture. In one case, claimed that if a woman groped a man's genitals, she should be killed. The passage that he quoted, which was Deuteronomy 25, verse 11 to 12, actually says her hand shall be cut off, which, even in Old Testament times, definitely wasn't a death sentence, since the bleeding could be stemmed, they could cauterize the wound, and as long as infection didn't come around, she could still live. It wouldn't be a pretty thing, but she would live. An interesting case is that of Cain and Abel, because Cain killed his brother Abel, and despite the fact he wasn't even attempting to reconcile with God over it, he wasn't killed. And in fact, God marked him as sinful to kill, and so was forced to live his life in the memory of what he had done. This heavily implies that there's more to life that can be worse than death. And this is actually shown in Jeremiah. Do not weep for the dead king, or mourn his loss. Rather weep bitterly for him who is exiled, because he will never return, nor see his native land again. Do not weep for the dead. Rather pity those who can't return home. Essentially, those that get kicked out of the family and never allowed back in. So exile is clearly a far worse fate than death alone. Consider that well. Many atheists will point out the Bible has hundreds of examples of death being meted out to the masses, or God being very picky about who he kills, who his followers kill, and so forth. But I would say that we have an interesting situation here. It's not a straightforward choice between good and evil, to kill or not to kill. But things that can be bad or less bad. Two things that can both give bad results, or do things can give good results. The question here isn't which is good and which is evil. Both will be some level of good or evil. But is which is the lesser evil and which is the greater good. In the case of abortion, sometimes saving a child from being raised in a low-income family, struggling to have enough to eat, from being cast into the foster care system, which according to many doesn't protect children as much as it should, and in some cases even allows those who just don't care about the child and only care about the check they'll get from the government, or being brought into a highly abusive household where they're just starting to get killed by those who are meant to love them. Sometimes abortion is the better option, certainly for the child in question. Euthanasia is the same, forcing someone to stay alive when they are more likely to be a burden on their family, being dependent on them in every possible way. They have asked to be let go. This is far more evil than just letting them go and let them see what's beyond the last door. Capital punishment is an extreme measure and one that I don't agree with, but in the right circumstances it can make people safer. What's not something I support? If someone was dangerous enough that even the prison system can't restrain or reform them, then passing the ultimate judgment could be the better thing for all. Death isn't an easy topic to discuss, and the institutionalized killing of humans of any age, caste, colour, or personality is one of the darkest things to bring up. The Bible certainly outlaws killing on a broad level. I've said it before. Keeping to the letter of the law isn't as important as knowing why the laws were written down. So do your own research, people. Look into why those laws are there. Then decide whether it helps. I'm not aiming to change people's views on this topic. I'm just choosing to reveal some more things. Show that it's not as black and white as some people make it out. So please remember that, friends. If this topic crops up, argue your end, but listen to people. Do your own research into more things than just what the government does with criminals in one country compared to what we do. And also remember that there wasn't a reason for those laws. Look those up as well. Please remember that, friends. Stay safe, and God be with you.